Welcome to Every Child Belongs. I'm Kim Botto, an adoptive mom, grandma, and advocate for kids and teens with disabilities, as well as a longtime leader of kids and student ministries. In this show, we explore how we can create spaces where every child feels heard and valued, whether neurodivergent, differently abled, or they've experienced trauma. Every child belongs. We'll hear from educators, parents, professionals, and more, finding practical ideas that help build a compassionate and supportive world for every child. Let's get started. Welcome to Every Child Belongs.
Thank you.
Today, we have Sandra Peoples, my friend Sandra Peoples, Sandra lives in Texas. I live in Kentucky, but we were together 2 weeks in a row recently, which was so fun. We had meals together, we hung out, we even did some things together. But Sandra is not only my friend, she's smart. She's a PhD candidate. She also is the disability ministry consultant for the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. She's an adjunct professor for Liberty University. And she also wrote a book, Unexpected Blessings, The Joy and Possibilities of Life in the Special Needs Family. And then, Sandra, you have a brand new book coming out. June 1st? July 1st.
July 1st, yes.
July 1st. Okay, tell us the title of that book.
Okay, it is Accessible Church, a gospel-centered vision for people with disabilities and their families.
That's right. So, and I got the privilege of holding that book in my hand minutes after you held it in your hand for the first time.
You did. I know. It was so fun to get to celebrate that with you because writing a book is so lonely, right? Like we don't have coworkers. And so to be together and get to hold it and share that and then find your name in it because I quote you in the book, that was so fun.
It was so fun. So we have a picture with my mouth wide open because apparently that's how I express my excitement, by opening my mouth really wide. But so Sandra, so you've written a couple books on special needs and disability. Why? Tell us more about you and the why behind these two books and the work you're doing.
Well, I have been part of a disability family my whole life. So my big sister had Down syndrome. We were 14 months apart, and so there wasn't a day of my life that I wasn't part of a special needs family. And so I grew up with her. We grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. And so it was kind of one of those communities where everybody knew her and everybody knew our family. The church that we went to did a great job including her, which meant our whole family was able to attend together. And so that shaped me in a lot of ways as a person, the way that I stick up for people who can't always speak up for themselves. So that colored a lot of what I did and the decisions I made. But then in 2010, we have two boys, and the younger son was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. So even though I had grown up in this disability family as a sibling, I now had this very new experience as a parent. And of course, Down syndrome and autism are pretty different.
Mm-hmm.
You're navigating a lot of things that are new. I kind of like you're even learning to speak a new language in a lot of ways, all these acronyms that you don't know. So James on the spectrum of autism is more on the profound side of it. And so he's functionally nonverbal. So he needs a lot of support in daily activities, education, and even at church. So a lot of what I've done kind of for the last 10 years is encourage families because I have this unique perspective as a mom and a sister.
Right.
And so that first book really talks about my experiences and what I saw my parents go through, and then other friends who had kids with disabilities, and then what we went through as a family. And then the last couple of years, my focus has shifted more to disability inclusion in churches. My husband is a pastor, and so the churches that we go to have to be inclusive and welcoming. And so we've been able to take those steps at a couple of different places so that James could be included.
Yeah. You know what, though, Sandra? Unfortunately, the churches that you go to don't have to be inclusive or welcoming, because I talk to a lot of kids ministry leaders whose own child can't come to church. So how do you, I love how it's been like that for you. I would think a lot is probably your advocacy and also the openness of the church community. But how do you, you go into a new church because you guys have moved to new churches. How do you help that church come along and welcome not just your son, but other kids like him?
Yeah, that's a good question because as much as it feels normal for us, it's not normal for everybody. And so
Right.
at the church where we are now, we've been here almost 8 years. And when they were interviewing Lee as the pastor, one of the questions we asked was, do you have a disability ministry? And they said no. And so we said, if you hire Lee, are you willing to develop a disability ministry? Because the pastor's wife and the pastor's kid aren't going to stay home week after week. And they said, yeah, we're happy to do that. Now, I mean, it's not without some growing pains and, hey, does this fit under children's ministry or does it not? And then where do we start? Do we start with inclusion in the typical classrooms, which is where most churches start? But James needed a specialized environment. He wasn't comfortable in the regular children's ministry environment, no matter how many supports we put in place, especially because, pastors' kids are kind of there from when the doors open till everybody
Right.
leaves. So that was a long time to kind of fit him into a place that really didn't work for him. So we had to start with like a sensory room and a class in a sensory room. And so we took those steps early. We've been here for 8 years. And I really think as each year goes on, we add more to the ministry. We're able to serve more kids. We're able to serve more diagnosis. So it was really last year that we added an adult class. So now we have classes for every age and every diagnosis that we can. And we're a normal sized church. Like we run around 550. So we're not doing this on mega church budgets. And I know that that brings its own unique challenges. So I'm
Right.
not saying that's the solution to everything, but for us, it's like, okay, we're the size church that needs to be doing this, but doesn't always think that they can do it. And so it's a lot of vision casting and training and getting people excited.
Yeah. Okay. I have a couple questions to ask based on that. One is when we look at James, because I have come a long way in this, Sandra. It used to be, I thought, inclusion all the time, every minute. And now I realize that's not what's best for the kid. So tell us more about James, because what we want is we want every child to belong.
Right.
And I think what helps is hearing stories, and people might then identify, there might be a kid in their ministry that they can identify with. How do we determine what is best for a child?
Yeah, I think we have a kind of a question that we ask where when we're talking about placement for kids in our ministry. And the question is, where can they best hear, understand, and respond to the gospel? And so I would say 80% of our ministry they're in those inclusive settings. So they're getting help from a buddy. They're in with their typical peers. About 80% of our ministry participants do that. So then it's just about 20 that are more in a class like James's, where it's a specific class designed to meet his learning needs and his sensory needs. And so now that doesn't mean he's never with the church body. He comes to the service. His class sits through the music in the service. And so they're there on the front row and everybody sees them and they're worshiping with us. And then the way that we do his class, we call it reverse inclusion. So the class is designed for teenagers with disabilities, but we invite typical teenagers in to be a part of that class. And so we're not fitting James into a youth ministry environment, but we're bringing some of the youth into his environment so that he gets to build those relationships and friendships. And so really what it comes down to for us is, where can this child best hear, understand, and respond to the gospel? And then that's the placement. Now that can change, right? Like we have kids in children's ministry who may have buddies. And then when they transition to youth ministry, we do what we call like a fading buddy. And so the buddy's there, but it's an invisible buddy. And so they're pulling back their help as that teenager is able to advocate for themselves and just socialize better, be able to get their needs met. So it really depends on the kid, but not in an overwhelming way. Like we just kind of think, man, we just see each kid as an individual and we think, what are this kid's sensory needs, learning needs, social needs? And then we design a discipleship plan that meets those needs. And then we put the kiddos and the teenagers and the adults in the environment where we can best meet those needs.
Right. We were working on a project together, and I wrote this quote down because I think you should make T-shirts out of it. But I think it speaks to what you just said. We don't serve a diagnosis; we serve people.
Yeah.
So tell us. You started to tell us a little bit about this, but how might we get it wrong?
Well, you think of the word autism, and what the saying is, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? Like,
Right.
because autism incorporates such a spectrum of experiences. And so if you just get paperwork on a child and their parent has said, this child has autism, well, that can mean a lot of different needs on this spectrum of how we could help meet those needs. And so if we're just looking at paperwork on a child or we're just looking at a diagnosis, that doesn't really tell us everything we need to know about the child in order to meet their needs. And so we really get to know that child as an individual, what their needs are. And sometimes that communication is coming from the parents. We have kind of a longer form that we have parents fill out when they're coming to our church if they answer yes, that their child has a special need or disability or learning disability or behavioral diagnosis. If they answer yes to that question, we have a follow-up form that gives us a better picture. But we're also asking, what are the strengths that your child has? What do they love doing? What is triggering for them? Because we want to try to avoid those situations, especially as they're coming for the first time. So if we know for sure that loud noises are triggering, we're going to have noise reducing headphones available, or we're going to have a quieter part of the room that we stand in. So we're building as much as we can from the information the parents give us, but then we're meeting that kid and we're seeing the gifts and the design that God created them with,
Right.
which includes the ability to have a relationship with him, whatever that looks like for that child. And so we're there to nurture that and provide the environment where that can best flourish.
Sandra, you mentioned headphones. So how do we prepare for a family? How do we know what their child needs?
That's a great question. Part of it is what the families communicate to us on that intake form. We have some questions that we ask. Part of it is observation. So if I see a kiddo in the back of the room and he's covering his ears, then I'm going to offer noise reducing headphones, right? So what we have in place at our church is we have buddies, and they can be either teenagers or adults, and they carry these cinch backpacks. They're blue. And in those backpacks, we call them our buddy bags, and they have the tools that a kid might need. There's fidgets in there. There's noise reducing headphones. There is a visual schedule. There's a visual timer. So there's all these tools that have benefited our kids. And so we load up those buddy bags with those tools, and then that buddy can see those signs in that kid and can meet those needs. And the better we know the kid, the more needs we're able to meet. Normally we have what we call a floater buddy in each room. And so no matter which kid, if it's a kid that we know has a diagnosis, or if it's a kid that slipped in and mom and dad didn't tell us that there was a diagnosis, then that buddy is prepared to meet those needs of any of those kids. And so that's what it looks like for us. And then there's lots of steps that we have learned to take that benefit not only the kids with disabilities, but they benefit everybody in the room. And so say something like a visual schedule, it helps kids who are neurodiverse because it decreases that anxiety about what's coming next. Well, it helps all kids too to
Yes.
know what's
Yes,
coming
it
next.
does.
And so some of those tools we've just made universal. And so every room might have a visual schedule that these kids can see to decrease that anxiety. Or a visual timer is one of my favorite tools. So you can get different sizes of it, and you set the timer, and the time that you set it for turns a different color, like it'll turn red. And so you might set it for 15 minutes, and then that red disappears. And so if you have kids who can't tell time or have time blindness, they can look to that timer and see the time go. And then one of the things I love about the timer especially is that doesn't make me the bad guy, right? Like,
Right.
I'm not the one telling them it's time to clean up and sit at the table.
Mm-hmm.
The timer is telling them it's time to transition. So there's lots of tools like that that are available that help us meet the needs of these kids. And so some observation time, some asking parents. One thing that we do when we see a behavior is we'll ask the parents, we notice this behavior. Is there anything you do at home or at school to help? So instead of saying, Like, especially if it's a kid, maybe it's a 3-year-old, and the family doesn't even see signs of a disability or diagnosis, but we do because we've been around enough kids. So we're not going to say, hey, we think your child might have autism. We're going to say, we notice this behavior. Is there anything you do at home or at school, if they're school age, that helps decrease that frustration or that reaction? And so that kind of helps the parents not be defensive, right? Because we're not coming and saying your child has a diagnosis and therefore we can't serve them or they have to be in this class. Those are not the solutions we're throwing out. We're just working with the parents to figure out a solution to the behavior and then meeting that need.
If you're loving today's conversation and want to dive even deeper into creating spaces where every child belongs, check out my book, Boundless Hope. It's packed with practical tools, real stories, and powerful insights to help you make a difference. Get yours today. Just head to kimbotto.com or Amazon to order now. You talked earlier about your church and how, because of the size of the church, they sometimes think, well, we can't do it. What are some barriers that churches have to supporting people who are different? And how might we, if somebody wants to start, what's a good first step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, a couple of years ago, I was at an event for children's ministers and I met the husband of a children's minister. And, you introduce yourself and he's like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I do disability. And he was like, oh, well, we don't do that at our church.
Oh,
And he said, my wife is just way too busy and we don't have the money to give them what they need. And then if we let one of them in, they would all want to come.
oh, what'd you say? What did you say?
I mean, like, that's my kid he's talking about, right? Like,
Right.
he's literally saying, your family is too much work for our church. And so, you just, all you're hearing, but Kim, when I sat with it for a little while, I thought, this is fear, right? He's speaking from his fear. It's not a hatred of my family. If you
Mm-hmm.
asked him, he would say that we deserve to hear the gospel. He was just thinking, man, my wife is worn out. She's always looking for volunteers. She never has enough money. She never has enough time. So it was just really fear that was at the bottom of that. And so, this story from the gospels when the four friends, they have a friend who's paralyzed
Yep.
and Jesus is teaching at a house and they go up on the roof and they lower their friend so that their friend can meet Jesus. And I think really they had the same barriers that we have. Like, they didn't have enough time because they didn't know how long Jesus was going to be there. All these resources they didn't have. And so they had to like literally go through the roof. I mean, I just think of the care and the creativity. And it's because they had a relationship with their friend that they were willing to overcome those obstacles and say, no, meeting Jesus is worth it. We're going
Yeah.
to see these obstacles, but we're going to find a way to overcome them. And I think, this, a big part of that is you start with prayer. Like, God's heart is for kids with disabilities and every kid. And so God is going to make a way, sometimes in very surprising ways, to help us be able to take those steps. But also, you don't have to come up with a solution for every possible kid that might come to your church. So you don't have to say, well, we can't do anything because we can't do everything. Like, the families that come, you get to know their kid, you meet that kid's needs. And then the next family that comes, you get to know that kid, you meet his or her needs. Because these are still lost families who often have been hurt by the church before. And so that idea, like, we're going to get overrun, that doesn't happen in very many places because there's still lost people or people who are carrying church hurt. And so a family like mine has to feel that their child is safe and loved. And that takes time before we're going to fully keep showing up and be invested in that church. So I think it's often easier than we think it would be. I think that children's ministers aren't always aware of how many resources are out there.
Right.
So that's a big part of it, is they don't know what they don't know. So the more resources they find out about, the more confident they feel too.
And you are a great resource. I point so many people to sandrapeoples.com. You have a ton of resources, not just for churches, but for families. And I appreciate the way you just so freely and generously give it away. And I just want to go back to one thing you said as far as the fear. I think this statement where people think we can't do anything because we can't do everything. That's such a That's good, Sandra. That should be on a t-shirt too. That's
Well,
really
and
good.
we wouldn't say that about any other ministry, right? Like we wouldn't
No,
say it
no.
about youth ministry or children's ministry, or like we wouldn't say we don't want to start a youth ministry because then too many teenagers would come.
Right.
So when we apply it to disability, it still doesn't work. It's
Yeah.
still,
Just take one step. Just take one step.
yep.
You're not trying to reach every kid. One step. Um, Sandra, in your brand new book, there's a whole section called What is the Goal of Inclusion? So tell us, what is the goal?
Well, the goal is the gospel.
Yep.
And we could sit there for a long time. The past models of disability inclusion have not been about discipleship, right? They've been a little bit more like babysitting.
Yep.
Like if you had 15, 20 years ago, if you had a kid like James in your church, you're probably just going to put him in a corner or put an adult or two in a room with him and say, hey, we're just going to hang out, right? Because you're not always aware of what the discipleship possibilities are for somebody who can't express verbally their faith. And so when I say the goal is the gospel, it's really a shift from like this babysitting model to an evangelism and discipleship model to say, no, James is created in the image of God, which means he has the potential of having a relationship with God, which means it's my job as his mom and a ministry leader to be faithful to expose him to the gospel and to God's love for him. And so thinking about the goal being the gospel helps us make decisions about the placement of the child, the environment that they're in, but also what can this child do? Just because, so like my older son, who I haven't mentioned him, he has dyslexia. And so there's limitations for him, especially when it comes to like scripture memory. That was really hard for him when he was younger. Well, just because he couldn't go through the scripture memory book the way everybody else could didn't mean he couldn't memorize scripture if he just had a different way to do it. And so we think of a goal like scripture memory and we break it down and we say, what could this look like to still reach the goal? So like in James's class, we use recordable buttons and we would record different parts of a verse on different buttons. And then his class can put those they can play, it'll say 3 or 4 words, and then they put those buttons in order and then they hit the buttons and it does the verse. Well, that's an easy way to do it. Or can they sing a song with the verse? Or can they fill in blanks instead of having to memorize the whole thing? Like there's lots of different ways that we can modify what our expectations are so that every child gets to participate at the level that they are able to participate.
Yeah, I have never seen those buttons. It's probably, is it on your list, your Amazon list on your site?
They're on Amazon and they're like, you can do different colors. And so like sometimes we do the red, like no, and the green is yes. And so the kids can just hit the buttons for that. But you can record anything you want to on the button. So it could change every week. And then the kids hit the buttons and they hear whatever you've recorded on there. And so that's really helpful for scripture memory. But say the whole lesson has one main idea and you just want to keep repeating that one main idea, then you could pass that around and every kid in a classroom would get to hit it and then they would hear the main idea for that week.
Oh, so it's fun and it solidifies a point.
Yeah.
Great idea. So you obviously do a ton coaching churches and you are a family who have 2 kids who are neurodivergent. What do you want people to know about you, your sons, and your family, and how can people best support you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the hardest things about being a disability family is loneliness. We're isolated in unique ways, especially because like James is 17, but he is not like other 17-year-olds. And so if we go to a friend's house, I still have to be able to see where he is. So it's not like he's able to go in another room with the other teenagers and play Xbox or something, right? Like that doesn't work
Right.
for our family. And so that can be really isolating because first of all, people just they aren't inviting us over because they don't know what accommodations James would need, or they know that he prefers being at home, and so they don't even reach out. But there's other ways to build friendships with us. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the simple ways at church is when people speak to James. So even though he doesn't always respond, his friends at church look at him and say, "Hi, James, we're so happy you're here. We're so glad to see you," as opposed to just ignoring him and only talking to me. And so that's a big part of helping our whole family feel like we're valued and loved and cared for in this church community. And they get to know his likes and his preferences and the things that he does. So we have a woman in the church who just seems to have, I don't know, I think God speaks to her and tells her when we're going to have a really busy, crazy week, because she'll just text out of the blue and say, "Hey, can I bring dinner?" And we always say yes. And she knows that James doesn't always eat what we eat, but she always packs something just for him.
Oh,
And so she'll put
that's
a
so
little baggie and it'll say James on it, and it'll be like sliced cucumbers or, like something that she knows he loves. But that takes time on her part and attention to get to know him and to get to
yes.
know us so that she can meet those needs. And so it's such a gift, those little things that people do that that they know it. But part of that is on us being vulnerable and
Yeah.
letting other people know us. Like if we
Mm-hmm.
just hid away and pretended like everything was great all the time, then we're not doing our part in building community either. So we're big on hospitality. We have people over all the time. And part of why that's important to us is that even though we can't easily go to somebody else's house, we love people getting to be here with us so we get to know them, but they get to see James and get to know him and see how our family dynamics work, and that helps bring us closer.
How might how might somebody approach you if they're looking at you and saying, "Gosh, I've noticed she's not participating in all these things." What would be something that we could ask you, that isn't offensive, where we could find out more about how we could start to build a friendship with you and your family?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, yeah, part of that is them maybe seeing a need and offering specifically to meet that need. I think part of it for us, Facebook is kind of a gift in this way. And
Mm-hmm.
so we might post something on Facebook and then that gives people an in. So they'll say, "Oh, it's James's last week of school. What do you have planned for the summer?" And then I can easily say, "Oh, we're really going to be overwhelmed this summer because we have X, Y, and Z." And then that gives them the opportunity to come back and say, "Well, we're going to pick up pizza on Friday night for our family. Can we pick up a pizza for your family on Friday night?" Or, especially when James was younger, they might say, "Hey, we're headed to the park. Can we pick James up and take him?" Or even, and I'm speaking as a disability sibling myself,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, we're going to a movie. We know that James isn't comfortable in movies, but would David like to go with us to the movie?" And so then Big Brother gets an opportunity to go do something that he wouldn't get to do just with our family. And so I you just kind of notice things. We try to part of that is kind of the social media aspect of that is what are we sharing openly? What
Mm-hmm.
needs do they see that we have? And then I just like to say, like, one thing I try to warn well-meaning church people on is don't just say, is there anything I can do?
Right.
Or what can it, because that when we're overwhelmed with decision fatigue, we may not even be able to articulate what it is that we would need from somebody. And so don't say, let me know if there's anything I can do, because I'm never going to let you know.
Right.
Unless we're
Right.
really, really good friends,
Uh-huh.
I don't ask for help really easily. But if somebody has the idea of what to do to help and they take that step, it's much easier for me to say yes to a decision that's already made.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes both. It's not the responsibility solely on either party. It's both in the community. One thing before we wrap up is when we were together a couple weeks ago, I shared this story with your permission. But tell us about, I have used this so many times. You said that James isn't a typical 17-year-old. So because of that, when he turned 16, what did he get for his birthday?
He got a swing set.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tender thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's sneaky grief that
Yeah.
happens for special needs disability parents, and as much as we love our kids and as much as we care for them, there's some milestones that if our kids can't reach them, they can be a little bittersweet. And James turning 16 was going to be one of those. We kind of knew that about ourselves because Big Brother David got a car when he turned 16, and then you just think, man, there's such a big gap between what Big Brother David does and what James is able to do. And so we just had to really think, instead of saying, man, we're going to force him into something that doesn't work for him, or we're going to only dwell on the things that we don't have. Instead, we just celebrated him. And so his birthday party had a Blues Clues theme because he loves Blues Clues. And we had his friends from his class over, and we rented a bounce house, and his friends from church came. And then his big present was a big swing set in the yard. And he spends most of his time out on that swing set. And so
Mm-hmm.
just about every day we look out there and we think, we're so glad that we did that. We're so glad that we made
Yes.
that decision. Like there's a path in the grass that's directly from the porch to his
It's
swing.
amazing.
And so, man, when you see the joy that it brings him, it's just such an encouragement that we didn't try to force him into something that he wouldn't like, or tried to only dwell on the things that were lacking, but really just say, man, how can we celebrate him? How can we continue to meet his needs? And it just brings so much joy to him and to us to see that he felt celebrated and
Absolutely.
continues to enjoy that swing set.
Well, know that that story has been shared with others who are experiencing grief because their child wants a toy that for their chronological age just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And I love how you're showing us you can still grieve and you can celebrate exactly who he is in that moment. What a
Yeah.
fun party. You go,
Yeah.
Mama. Well done. Well done. Sandra, we like to wrap up with just a couple rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Moms of kids with differences are really good with rapid fire questions. So,
Yeah.
if you could eat only one food, what would it be?
Hamburgers. I love hamburgers. I could do different toppings on them each time. And so
Yeah?
I feel like that could be, it could feel like a different meal over and over.
Nice. What's your favorite family tradition?
Oh, well, that's a really interesting question, um, because disability families often have unique
Mm-hmm.
traditions,
That's why I
and
asked.
have to create our own. So, um, one of our favorite traditions as a married couple is we have dates on Fridays because it's my husband's day off. And so I only work until noon on Fridays, and then we go out to lunch, and then we get pizza for dinner as a family every Friday night. And so it just kind of gets us into that weekend mode. And it's such a good rhythm to say, okay, it's time to stop. It's time to kind of switch to family mode time. So Lee and I get that time together at lunch by ourselves, and then at dinner we're ready for family pizza night, and then we get right into that weekend routine, which as a ministry family too, who works on Sundays,
Right.
Friday time is especially such a blessing to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're going to take advantage of this Friday time too.
That's a great tradition, and it's simple. Traditions don't have to be big, ginormous things.
Yeah.
Lunch and then pizza at night.
Yeah.
It's great. What is your most memorable gift from your childhood?
Oh, it's books are kind of always going to be my answer, but I have a copy of Little Women that my grandmother bought for me, and it's a beautiful hardcover edition. I was in 3rd grade when she bought it for me. It's still on my bookshelf now. And I mean, growing up as a disability sibling, sometimes I didn't feel seen or known. And my grandmother did a good job of saying, I see you. I see what you're interested in. I see that you love to read. And so I'm going to give you this beautiful edition of this book because I want to encourage that in you. And so more than just the book, which is beautiful, but what it made me feel was seen and known and cared for. And so even when I see it on my shelf now, I'm reminded of that.
That's a great gift. Okay, this is the last one. Finish this thought. Every child
is loved by God first, and then in the people that God puts in his life. I think about that at church. And if we hid away from church, if only Mom and Dad and David loved James, that would be enough. A family's love is enough. But when we can widen that circle, when we can go to church and say, Miss Julie loves James, Pastor Matt loves James, this whole team of people, to just remember that when we as a family stay home too much or are afraid of getting out, not only is our kid missing out, but the people that we would be around are missing out. They're better because they are friends with James, and James is better because he's friends with them. And so just remembering how loved each child is, and that they have this opportunity for churches and family members and friends to be able to show the love that God has for them through the love that we show for them is really a blessing.
I agree. Well, Sandra, it's always fun to hang out with you. In person is more fun, but this is a good second best.
It is.
If people want to get in touch with you, you're on all the socials, right? Sandra Peoples.
Yep.
And then sandrapeoples.com?
Yep.
Is that the best way to reach out to you?
It is. Yeah. It's kind of the hub for all the things.
Yeah. And seriously, churches, if you're listening and you are thinking about starting a disability ministry, you are just starting or you're well established, Sandra has resources for all of you on her website. So go check her out. Anything else you want to say before we end, just to encourage the listeners?
No, you asked such good questions. And I think so much about what we do is about attitudes, the attitude that we have toward the kids and the families. Yes. And so you may not have the latest and the greatest accessibility tools. You may not be able to do everything. Like I have like an Amazon wish list, right? Like that doesn't mean you have to buy everything on this Amazon list in order to have the sensory room that our church has. Because what is most important is the child feeling loved and seen, which is what's important for all of us. And that can be done in very small ways. And it's more about the attitude of our hearts than it is about all these accessibility steps that we take because we love these families. But they first need to know that we love them. And that's what motivates us to keep taking those steps of inclusion.
That is a perfect way to end. Thank you so much, Sandra Peoples.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Every Child Belongs. If you found today's episode helpful, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to share this with a friend who might need to hear it. Together, we can create a world where every child belongs.